So let's dive right into it. So have you ever come up with a perfect social engineering pretext, even bought some clothes or props to match that pretext, printed off your perfect fake badges that match the ones that you found online, you spoofed a call just to make sure to the branch manager, they bought the bait, they ushered you directly into their network closet, didn't even make you sign the log, they left you unattended in the closet, you plug in your Dropbox, and you wound up on a honeypot VLAN. And then while you're still in the network closet and you haven't even left yet, you get a call from your client contact. It's like, oh yeah, we see you. We see what you're doing. Get out of there, take the device with you and go home. Okay. And then that leaves you wondering why, what happened here. Okay. So, your client explains, okay, we've got this thing called NAC in place, also known as 802.1x. So for red teamers, basically this is a way that you can require your network to have devices that connect to the network authenticate. So when a switch port goes from disabled to enabled, lights start blinking. Basically, the network can ask for authentication in various forms. So classic, easy way of doing this is sticky MAC. Basically, you assign a known good MAC address to a particular port. If another bad MAC address shows up, then you block the port, right? This is easy to spoof. You just kind of tap that interface for a second with a known good device, you get its MAC address, you spoof it, easy peasy. There's a couple other ways that you can configure 802.1x. There's password based, so some sort of credential material needs to be provided by a user or device in order to connect to the network. And then there's certificate based auth, where every device actually has a certificate that was configured by IT that is on the device, and it answers auth challenges. For both the password and the certificate, that makes our life difficult because it's not easy to just scrape that from the wire by doing like a LAN tap. Okay, so how do we bypass this? All right, so a couple things to keep in mind. Once the auth succeeds on that port, the port stays open and allows arbitrary traffic until either a configured lease time expires, in which case the device has to reauth, or maybe another device shows up on that port, indicating that there's a NAT going on here, and whoever's there has to re-authenticate. Also, of course, if the port goes back into the disabled and then re-enabled, right, you'd have to re-auth. But what we can do is use a machine in the middle attack to get that port enabled. We can flow that auth traffic through to a trusted device. So something like a PC, printer, IP phone, something that's supposed to be there. It answers the auth challenge for us. And then because we are then connected to the network, we can piggyback on that connection. So 3 easy steps. You take 2 Ethernet adapters, something like this, classically. You configure them on a virtual bridge. You allow all the traffic to pass that bridge. And then you plug in, a trusted device on one side, the network on the other. The trusted device auths for you. Boom, you have now done the hard part. You have bypassed NAC. Then to not get burned, all you have to do is just make sure that you don't leak the MAC address of either of your interfaces. And then when you actually want to send traffic on the network, you have to make sure that your MAC address and IP address matches that of the victim, right? The trusted thing. But we can do that with IP tables and EB tables once we know some core pieces of information. So that's how you do it. Super easy, right? Problem is, if you actually try to use these on a red team pen test, have you ever gotten busted because either the script you got from GitHub just didn't work, or the client has Air Marshal and they saw your Wi-Fi management access point sticking out like a sore thumb, or your reverse SSH tunnel got blocked by basic egress, like you tried to poke out on port 22 and they don't allow 22, or you tried to do SSH over a non-standard port and it was blocked, right? Or you got crafty and you actually infected your own device with Empire, so it was beaconing home, so you could later stage it to a more stable connection, only to actually get identified because the C2 was profiled by the firewall, or the device you tried to man the middle was a phone and it didn't generate enough of the traffic that you were looking for to auto-config, and then the attack never worked. Or you plugged this under someone's desk and the fan on it was so loud that they went looking for it and saw this thing and asked IT, okay, what is this thing under my desk? I have, right? And so that's, a core reason why I'm here doing this talk is with each of those hurdles, I was kind of adding on to, a known good script and process and just sort of piecemealing this thing together until it reached a breaking point. And I really got to a point where I wanted to do more fancy things like LTE callbacks. And some Python libraries I was using just didn't jive with that. And it would just crash the box every time. So I knew I had to start from scratch. So I wanted to start with the fundamentals of like, what do red teamers actually need for an ACK bypass? So it needs to be easy to install. We want adaptable callbacks, including some advanced ones like LTE. We want to make sure that the board itself has all the required components on it, ideally, so you don't have to plug in a bunch of dongles. Cheap hardware. And then in the field, what you really want is to just be able to drop and run. You want to be able to access the device over long range, if you need that. And then also it's great to have just like, basic troubleshooting interface to know if the attack is working. So with all those design factors in mind, let's go ahead and build it. So starting off with the board choice, this is a NanoPi R2S. One key thing about this board is it has 2 built-in Ethernet NICs, so you don't have to have these. They support monitor mode, and this is actually supposed to be for like DIY router projects, and so it's kind of perfect for implanting our own sort of rogue router on the network. It's very cheap. Obviously you got to buy an SD card to flash and like a few other things for it, but the board is super cheap. As far as easy install, I would say I've put more time, even though I wrote the actual script to do the attack from scratch, I wrote way more. I put more time into the README to make sure that it is well documented with easy install steps. Like if you wanted to set up an LTE callback, I have a step-by-step of how to do that. Every piece of that setup that can be scripted is scripted, and I let you know this is what you have to change. This is how you find the particular product ID that for your device to make this setup script work for you. As well as advanced use cases, how to run responder with a setup like this when that traffic would normally traverse your bridge untouched. Adaptable callbacks, as I mentioned, so you can always just do a network callback with this, classic reverse SSH connection. You run the chance of getting caught at the network perimeter, as I mentioned. This one is set up with a basic Wi-Fi access point. So if you're within range of this, you can actually basically use this as your own, rogue AP to get onto their network. As I mentioned, that also could be detected with something like Air Marshal. If you can be sitting there physically and working with the device, you can use a solid state connection like this over Ethernet to manage the device and piggyback that connection. And then, as I mentioned, for like long range drop and run, you can get a USB LTE dongle, and so then you can actually remotely administer this thing over LTE, and that is how you're punching down into your target network. So you don't have any traffic that traverses the perimeter at all. So very hard to catch. And then as far as drop and run goes, you want to be confident that this thing can auto-config and do the attack. And so one key consideration is I basically took the stance of we assume whatever device that you are man-in-the-middling is not one of these very important functions on the network. Like, yeah, you might have man-in-the-middle a printer that technically has an HTTP server on it, but unless you actively like get some user that is connecting to that HTTP endpoint while you're doing this attack, we're not, I think it's more likely that the printer, when it connects back to the network, is going to make an outbound HTTP connection to like a config server or something like that, right? So as long as we assume that the thing we're man-in-the-milling is not acting as one of these functions, then it's very easy to detect all the necessary information that we need to set up the attack, because you can easily tell what is a call and what is a response for these different types of protocols, right? So for instance, for DNS, by tapping that bridge and seeing, oh, this is a DNS query or a reply, either one of those, whichever one we see first, we can actually pull out all the necessary information that we need to spoof that client to the network, know where our default gateway is, and start sending traffic to the network undetected. In the case of DNS, we get a freebie because if we actually parse the protocol out, then we get a DNS server that we can actually use on the internal network, right? As I mentioned, for troubleshooting, The project does have a web interface, so you can actually see, here's an example of after the attack has run its course, you can see the host name, IP, MAC address of the thing that you man in the middle, what your default gateway is, your search domain, your DHCP server, subnet mask, the TTL of the host that you're man in the middling, as well as some other freebies. Like you can see what your ARP neighbors are. And if you happen to see, like, I've got some neighbors that are printers, like, why not just start there? Like, do those things have, LDAP configured or something like that? And then it also comes with a full command log, so you can actually see under the hood all the commands that were run. So you could actually like pull those out in a bash script if you wanted to, put it on some other device and just run that script, and then like swap it out for whatever is currently there. So anyway, if you want to check out the project, it's on GitHub. Thank you very much to Wild West Hacking Fest and the review board for letting me come here and present this. I did want to just kind of demo really quick that management over LTE, if it will work. So I think I'm working lots of time. All right, sweet.
Also, if anybody has questions, let's take questions.
Quite a few, actually. We have a lot of.
You got.
Oh, sorry. All right. He asked, all right, how many clients do we run into that have 802.1x fully deployed? And I would say it's becoming more and more common. We work with a lot of financial institution clients where we have harped on this. We've done some MAC spoofing before, and they will ask, okay, how do we do, how do we stop that? And we'll say, okay, you've got this, you're working with Cisco. Why don't you look into Cisco ICE? That can help you identify rogue devices trying to attach to your network. And yeah, we have come up against quite a few cases where we needed this type of tool. So here's just an example of, I am remoted into this over LTE. You don't have to have a massive antenna, but it helps when LTE signal's weak. When you're in Deadwood, South Dakota. So, you can run attacks from the device, but I would recommend that you use it sort of like a router. All right. And in the README, I explain how basically you can set this device as your route to a particular subnet, and then you can run attacks from your system. So you don't have to, install a bunch of bloat and a bunch of tools on this, bare bones box. It's meant to be a router. You can use it as a router to route your traffic. And then, here's just an example of, I did a little, port forwarding. So now when I hit localhost 4444, I actually get that, interface for the attack. If I actually plug this in, in between a device and the network, you would see this dashboard populating. You don't even have to refresh it. It uses WebSockets to actively show, here's your ARP neighbors, here's the attack, going on. And then once you see that, okay, I'm safe to walk away. This thing's working. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, you just go back in, set this device on your, it has an IP on your Zerotier, your VPN, set it as your route to the thing that you want to attack, and go for it. Treat it like you are on that network. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Zerotier, so it's sort of like a cloud-based VPN. There is a free tier, so this is just a free network that I set up. You can join devices to it. You kind of check a box to allow them onto your network, and then they can talk to each other. I go through the right subnet mask and all that stuff that you should use to set this up. David Anderson actually helped me with the networking for this, where basically we use 1/24 out of the 172.31.255 range to make sure that we use this a very small private IP space for us and what we have to do to communicate with the device. And then we can assume that every other private range is then going to go out the actual network, that we are attacking. So as long as your target is not using our one very obscure /24, you should be fine talking to any one of their internal devices from this. And then, as I mentioned, it is a router. So when you're just doing the Wi-Fi callback, and you just attach to your access point, it issues like an IP to you over DHCP. It is then your default gateway anyway. And if you want to start communicating with the internal network as if your device was on it, then all you have to do is manually set the DNS servers on your system. And then it basically routes all your traffic through that device as if you're on the target network. Yeah, so he asked about compatibility issues for the LTE dongle. I was able to get a Huawei that I saw another write-up of a pen tester using a similar Huawei dongle. So I just figured, okay, that's a good way to go. I've had coworkers use the Cricket ones, are very popular and cheap. I don't know if you can find this particular model of Huawei, but as far as compatibility goes, I learned a lot about setting this up and setting it up properly. It probably took me weeks of kind of banging my head against the keyboard and trying a bunch of stuff. I wrote an extensive section of the README of, if you can't get this thing to turn on, this is where you look in the message to find that, or this is how you set verbose logging for this thing that you need to set. And this is how you can manually try step 1 and step 2 to make sure that you can manually get all the information that you need. So you should be able to use another model and follow my README and be able to set that up. Yeah. Is there anything that you can't do on this? There are things that are more difficult to do. Like I mentioned, running responder, that traffic would normally traverse your bridge, but you can set up IP tables rules to say, I want to actually manage the traffic on this particular juicy port. And I have examples of how to do that. I'm at a loss to say if there's something that you really couldn't do. Broadcast stuff is really hard. So it might be extremely difficult to go through the hoops that you'd have to set up, let's say like an MITM6 or like rogue DHCP server where this is acting as that. But for most other tools, you can route through this. Yeah. And I have examples again of a lot of those, like reverse shells, running responder, FTP, and other kind of more complex setups. Yep.
So have you used this on the live?
Have I used it on a live engagement? We've used it on several. So it did not get caught. Yeah. So we've done front to back red team engagements where this was our implant against Forescout, Cisco ICE, and a few others that I'm going blank on, but it works. Yeah.
Yes, they had it.
Yeah, where they had full 802.1x implementation. Yeah, server password base doesn't matter because again, we're just passing off whatever it is. We don't care what's in the ePOL frames. Yeah, we used LTE then. And these were environments where we had been busted on previous engagements trying to use those variants. So we were like, all right, they're not going to see LTE, so we'll make something that can do that. So you have that capability when you need it, but then it's also you can set up a few others. I would say, kind of pro tip, I have quite a few SD cards that I have like little symbols on them to say like this one's configured for Wi-Fi, this one's configured for Ethernet. So you can just have one physical device, and then you can like hot swap its config, and then how it's going to call back.
Folks, Brian's not here to turn me on. Thanks again for being here with us. This is our last talk of the day for the tool shed, but we'll be here again tomorrow starting at 1 in the afternoon again. So if you like the open source tools, come hang out with us backstage here. And we'll be doing this all over again. Of course, if you like the tool shed, please let us know in the Wild West Hackin Fest feedback channel in Discord, or if you don't like the format or you think we could do something better, different, definitely let us know that. We've been kind of growing this event now for 3 of these. We'd love more submissions as well. So I'd love to see any of you submit your favorite open source tools and volunteer to give a lightning talk like Forrest has here. Thanks again for the great talk on 802.1x and NAC bypass. I've never had anybody bring hardware to one of these before. So it's really nice to see all the little bits and bobs. But yeah, this isn't really necessarily stealthy. and make sure you take stickers. We have so many of these stickers. Would love to see them popping up on the laptops around the conference and at other events. Let's give him one more hand.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.